Years after Hannah and June had passed the letters to their children, the family held a gathering to celebrate what would have been Suk and Akio's 50th wedding anniversary. Though their grandparents were no longer alive, the entire family came together. Children, grandchildren, cousins, filling the old countryside home with life again. The veranda where Suk and Akio had once sat was decorated with photos. Their wedding day, family vacations, moments of laughter caught on camera. At the center stood a simple frame with one of their letters, the words clear and bold. I choose you, again and again. The grandchildren took turns sharing memories and reflections. Mina, the eldest, spoke first. They showed us that love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. And even though we didn't grow up seeing all of their struggles, we grew up inside the love they built. Her cousin Daniel added, whenever life feels too hard, I think of Grandpa leaving the boardroom early just to be home for bedtime, or Grandma balancing her own dreams while holding the family together. They taught us balance. They taught us sacrifice. One by one, the family members spoke. Not of wealth, not of success, but of the love that had shaped them all. By the time the youngest granddaughter, barely 12, stood to speak, tears glistened in nearly every eye. She said simply, I never met them, but I feel them. Every time our family is together like this, I know it's because of them. Silence followed her words, broken only by the sound of the evening breeze rustling through the trees. Later, as the sun set, the family lit lanterns and released them into the night sky. Dozens of glowing lights floated upward, a symbol of the love story that had begun with two people from different worlds who dared to choose each other. And as the lanterns drifted higher, Hannah whispered to June's children, her voice carried by memory. Tell this story to your children one day, because love like theirs should never be forgotten. Generations passed. The countryside home where Suk and Akio had once lived became more than a house. It became a sanctuary of memory. Though the paint peeled and the wood grew weathered, no one in the family allowed it to be sold. It was where the story had begun and where it continued to be told. Their great-grandchildren, who had never seen either Suk or Akio, grew up hearing their names spoken with reverence. They knew the story of the drunken proposal, the resistance of the world, and the quiet resilience that followed. To them, their great-grandparents were legends, not because of wealth or status, but because they had built a love strong enough to ripple across time. On the 100th anniversary of Suk's birth, the family gathered once again at the old home. This time, the great-grandchildren led the ceremony. One of them, a young woman named Sora, stood before the family holding the same wooden box of letters. Her hands trembled as she unfolded one and read aloud, I choose you, again and again. Her voice cracked with emotion. We never met them, she said softly, but their love built all of this. Every life here is a reflection of the choice they made to fight for each other. And if we can live with even half the devotion they showed, then we'll be honoring them. The family bowed their heads, each lost in reflection. Outside, the air was filled with laughter as children ran in the yard, just as Hannah and June once had. Later that night, the great-grandchildren gathered by the fireplace. Do you ever wonder, one of them asked, if Grandma Akio and Grandpa know we're still telling their story? Sora smiled through tears. I think they do, because love like theirs doesn't end. It keeps moving forward, through us. And so, the story that had begun with a clumsy, unexpected proposal under the haze of champagne lived on, woven into generations, carried in blood and memory, shaping lives long after the two who started it had gone. Their great-grandchildren didn't just inherit their names or their photographs. They inherited their courage. They inherited their devotion. They inherited the quiet, unshakable truth that real love doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be chosen, again and again. Time moved on as it always does. Seasons changed, generations rose and fell, but the story of Suk and Akio never faded. In the village near their old countryside home, people began to speak of them not just as ancestors, but as a parable. Their tale was told at weddings, whispered to young couples struggling with doubt, shared with children as proof that love can cross oceans, cultures, and even the weight of the world. The wooden box of letters became a family treasure, but also a symbol known beyond their bloodline. Visitors came from far places just to see the house where a Korean CEO and a Kenyan girl built a love strong enough to last 100 years and more. Eventually, the family placed the letters in a glass case inside the home, now preserved as a heritage site. Above it hung a single plaque engraved with the words that had defined their legacy. Love does not have to be perfect. It only has to be chosen again and again. And so, their story became timeless. No longer bound to the years they lived, but echoing through the centuries as a reminder that love, when nurtured with patience and courage, can outlive even death itself. Suk and Akio were no longer just husband and wife. They were legends. They were proof. They were eternal. Decades after the countryside home became a heritage site, it was no longer just the family who gathered there. Strangers, couples, travelers, students began visiting, drawn by the story of a love that had endured against all odds. A young writer from Nairobi once stood in the quiet living room, staring at the glass case of letters. She had just gone through a painful breakup, certain she would never believe in love again. But when she read Suk's clumsy, heartfelt promise and Akio's patient, enduring replies, she wept and left the house determined to try again, to believe again. Years later, a South Korean filmmaker made a documentary about them. It aired internationally, and people in distant countries found themselves reflecting on their own relationships. Some reconciled after years of silence. Others gathered courage to cross cultural or family barriers, inspired by a couple who had done so long ago. The story traveled further still. In classrooms, professors used their lives as a case study of love's resilience across cultures. In churches and mosques, preachers quoted their words as reminders that love was not passive, but an active, daily choice. One day, on what would have been their 150th wedding anniversary, thousands of lanterns were released into the skies above the village. They floated upward, glowing softly, a symbol of how their love had lifted countless hearts long after they were gone. Among the crowd stood a young Korean man holding hands with his Kenyan fiancée. He whispered to her, "If they can do it, so can we." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and together they let their lantern rise into the night. And so, the legacy of Suk and Akio was no longer just family history. It was a living fire, passed hand to hand, heart to heart, across continents and centuries. Their story had begun with a proposal made under the haze of alcohol. But it endured because, every day after, they chose each other. And that choice became a light for the world. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Cities changed their names, and technology reshaped the world in ways their great-grandchildren could never have imagined. Yet in small villages and bustling cities alike, people still spoke of the love story between Suk and Akio. Over time, the details blurred. The drunken proposal became a parable about destiny's unpredictability. Their struggles with family and culture became a tale of courage against impossible odds. The countryside home, preserved through countless restorations, became a place of pilgrimage. Some came to pray for love, others to renew vows, and some simply to touch the earth where they once lived. Bards and poets began retelling the story in different ways. In one version, Suk was a prince, and Akio the daughter of the sun. In another, they were ordinary souls who defied heaven itself to be together. Yet no matter how it was told, the heart of the story remained unchanged. Love is not perfect. Love is chosen. Hundreds of years later, a child sat under the shade of an ancient tree near the home, listening to her grandmother tell the story for the 1000th time. "Did they really exist, Grandma?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with wonder. The grandmother smiled knowingly. "Yes, child. They lived, they struggled, they loved. And because they chose each other, we are here. Because they chose each other, love still has a story to tell." The child closed her eyes and imagined a young man with a nervous smile, raising a glass too many, blurting out words that changed the course of history. She imagined a young woman, steady and kind, choosing not just him, but the life they would build together. To her, it was no longer just history. It was a legend. It was true. And as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, the tale of Suk and Akio lived on, not as a memory of two people long gone, but as a timeless echo, teaching each generation the same eternal lesson, that love, when chosen faithfully, becomes stronger than time itself. The lanterns of two souls, symbolizing their love carried across generations like light in the sky, chosen again and again, echoing the words that became their eternal legacy. The house where love did not end, tying to their countryside home as the root of their legend. When the ocean met the sun, a symbolic title for Korea, the sea, and Kenya, the warmth of the sun. The eternal proposal, from that first drunken, imperfect moment that became legend. Love beyond time, simple, mythic, and universal. And so, the world came to know their story as the lanterns of two souls. What began as a clumsy proposal under the haze of wine became a legacy that outlived centuries, crossing bloodlines, cultures, and nations. Their love was not perfect, but it was steadfast, chosen again and again. Suk and Akio no longer lived in memory alone. They lived in every lantern lifted to the sky, in every vow whispered between trembling hearts, in every generation that dared to love despite the odds. Their story was no longer just theirs. It belonged to the world. It belonged to eternity. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment. Also like, share, and subscribe to my channel and click on the notification icon so that you will get notified whenever a new story is uploaded.